Hello. Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, August 17th, 2023. My name is Ashley Glover, and I'm here with attorney Kim Christian, and we are happy to welcome you to our webinar, How to Protect Yourself in a Crisis. So let's get warmed up with a few housekeeping items. This presentation should run about 30 minutes. We put together a PowerPoint, which we are showing on screen along with our webcams. To help minimize background noise, your mics are muted, so please use the Q&A box to submit questions. We've saved time at the end to answer as many as we can. Feel free to chat with us or each other in the chat box. We are recording and will email you a link to the recording. And finally, we value your feedback, so please let us know how we did in the webinar survey. The survey will appear on your screen once the webinar ends. All right, let's introduce our presenter, Kim Christian. Kim is a dedicated partner with Russo Law Group. She's the lead planning attorney in our Lido Beach office. She also meets with clients in the Garden City office, virtually, and home visits. She's been with the firm for over 15 years, helping clients with elder law, Medicaid, special needs, estate, and trust planning. Kim was recently recognized by Lawyers of Distinction for her excellence in the practice of law. So congratulations to you, Kim, and thank you for being here. Would not have a program without you. So I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you everyone for joining us. All right, what we will cover today: utilizing exemptions under the law to protect your assets and qualify for Medicaid at home or in a nursing home, implementing a plan to save all or portion of your assets using a loan or gift strategy, how to obtain long-term care coverage at home in a crisis, and of course, the end piece, implementing a plan in advance to avoid a crisis. So let's start with the foundation, paying for long-term care. We all know the cost of care in the region where we live is very expensive. For example, a nursing home is running about $15,000 a month, not a year, not every 6 months, $15,000 a month. And home care is not far behind. If I need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I am paying privately, that is a very expensive proposition. And there's 3 ways to pay for long-term care. Some people have what's called long-term care insurance. Long-term care insurance is an insurance policy that a person takes out that will pay out a daily rate toward a person's long-term care. Another way of paying for your care is privately, but as I just mentioned, that is a very expensive proposition. And the third way, and that's specifically what we're going to focus on today, is through Medicaid. Medicaid with a D. And I say Medicaid with a D because we want to make a distinction between Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare is for short term, Medicaid is for long term. Okay. So let's get started. Medicaid planning. Medicaid planning in a crisis. You don't have to lose all your assets. And that's one of the reasons we chose this topic today, because there are so many people that hear that if you get sick and you didn't plan in advance, that's it. You have to spend everything down. We're going to lose all of our assets. It's very scary, right? You have to live the rest of your life. And to think that if you got sick, you'd have to spend all your assets down, it's a very scary thing to face. So one of the things we want to bring out here is that you don't have to lose all your assets. There's something called spousal allowances. There's exempt transfers. There's rules under the Medicaid home care system. And I'm going to walk you through some of that today. All right, let's first start with the category utilizing exemptions under the law to protect your assets and qualify for Medicaid home or nursing home care. All right, so let's talk about your residence, because many of my clients are focused on not wanting to lose their residence. They don't want to have to sell it. They don't want to hear that a lien might be put on it if they get sick. They want to make sure that they protect their residence. And if you understand the foundation of the Medicaid rules, you'll understand why these exemptions are so important. So if I need care in a nursing home, distinguish between home care, it's a nursing home that I talk about, and I transfer my residence to a trust, something that is not on the list in front of you, then I am subject to what's called the 5-year look back. The 5-year look back is a rule that says from the date I've transferred the residence out of my name, well, they're going to look back 5 years and they're going to see, hey, did she make any transfers? And if she did, we think she did it on purpose and she got what's called stuck in the 5-year look back. And that's what people are very concerned about. They didn't plan in advance. Now they're sick. They need nursing home care, and they never tried to get past the 5-year look back. What this slide is about is there are some exceptions or exempt transfers. So if I have a family come to me and they're married and one of the spouses needs care in a nursing home, but they never transferred their house to get past the 5-year look back, I'm able to say, okay, but there's an exemption. And the exemption is that between spouse to spouse, I can transfer my house, even if it's within the 5-year look back, and the house would be protected. All right, so that's huge, right? So if I'm in a crisis, I didn't do pre-planning, my spouse is still well enough to be in the community, but I need nursing home care, I've got an exemption right there where I could help protect the house. The second exemption for the home is a transfer to a child with disabilities. It doesn't mean that it has to be a child as we think about perhaps under 18. It has to be your child, whether they're 50, 60, 40, 18, as long as it is a child who is under the disability laws considered disabled, you are able to transfer your residence to them, even within the 5-year look back. We have to be very careful with that, though, because sometimes if a person is on disability, it's what's called a means tested program. And we don't want to just transfer something outright if it's going to disrupt someone's benefits. The third exempt transfer, and I think this is an interesting one, it's called to a caregiver child. And a caregiver child under the Medicaid laws is considered to be a child who has lived with the parent for the last 2 years prior to when they need the nursing home. So let's do a hypothetical. Father needs nursing home care and his son lives with them. The father is a widower, so he doesn't have the spousal transfer. And the son isn't disabled, so he doesn't have the disability exemption. But the son has lived with him for the last 2 years prior to when he needed the nursing home. You may transfer that property to what's called the live-in caregiver child, and that is also considered an exempt transfer. And the last one that I wanted to cover is something called a sibling with an equity interest. And that's an interesting one. It says if I've had a sibling live with me for the last year, and he or she was on the deed with me, then I can actually transfer that property to that sibling, even if it's within the 5-year look back, and that's considered exempt as well. So if you find yourself or you know someone who's in a situation where they feel they never got past what's called the 5-year look back, they're in a crisis, they need a nursing home or home care, and they're afraid, hey, I never did advanced planning, you say, go talk to an experienced attorney, elder law attorney, because there are some exemptions that could provide the protection that a person is looking for. All of these should be done, with under the supervision of an experienced elder law attorney, because you have to just be careful to do it the right way and make sure there's no ramifications for the transfer as well. So now we're going to talk about assets generally. I was talking about the house just now, but what about money, right? What if I have a brokerage account? What if I have a life insurance policy? What if I have more than just the house? I never tried to protect it. I'm looking at a nursing home and I'm concerned that I'm caught within what's called the 5-year look back. Well, believe it or not, there's actually exempt transfers to a spouse. So from spouse to spouse, even if it's within the 5-year look back, I can make transfers and they're considered exempt. So that's a way of protecting the assets. And I can also give it to a child with disabilities. And we talked earlier, we want to be mindful if they're on a means tested program. So we may consider doing it to a special needs trust, but nonetheless, it gives us an option if we're in a crisis situation and we want to go ahead and preserve some of the assets. Okay, so now we get to what we call a very, very profound crisis. Now we're in a situation where we need a nursing home. We've done no advanced planning, so we're certainly not past the 5-year look back. And then now we've exhausted all our exemptions. I am a widow, or I was never married. I don't have a spouse. I don't have a living caregiver child. I don't have a disabled exemption. I am in a situation where I'm facing a nursing home. I'm facing a bill of about $15,000 a month, and I have done no planning. Is there anything I can do? Or is it I'm going to have to spend everything down? And the answer is no. You don't have to spend everything down. There is a planning tool that can be implemented, and it's through the use of a promissory note, also known as a loan, to see if we can protect. I would say the rule of thumb is between 40 and 50% of your assets. So when you hear that conversation with the next door neighbor that Mrs. Smith needed to spend down all of her assets, it is not necessarily the case. And even in the biggest crisis, when there is no exempt transferee, we are able to save approximately 40 to 50%. So this slide appears very complicated, so I'm going to do my best just to give you a broad overview since this is a general webinar. So what we want to do is we just want to make sure that we pay for everything we need to pay for before we start making any transfers or doing any loans. So we have I'm going to call it a pot of money that's left in our name that's making us not eligible for Medicaid. We want to make sure we keep our asset allowance. Right now, under the Medicaid laws, I can keep $30,182. I want to make sure I prepay my funeral. I'd like to spend my money on that, right? That's for the benefit of me. And then if I have legal fees or other expenditures I have to make, I can pay for that as well. Then what will happen is we'll say, okay, and I'm going to use $400,000. It's a nice round number. $400,000 is the amount I need to transfer in order to become eligible for Medicaid. All right. But if I transfer all $400,000 within the 5-year look back, I'm going to be penalized. So I have to do it in a very strategic way. And one of the ways you can do it is transfer approximately half of it, because that's the amount we want to save, right? In our hypothetical, that's $200,000, and then transfer the other half of it using a loan. And the loan will pay through the penalty period that the $200,000 caused. After the loan is exhausted, the penalty period will be over, and your family member will be able to go on Medicaid, and you will be able to save that $200,000. That was the hypothetical example I gave. So to sum up this slide, or to sum up this crisis planning strategy, is not to master the idea of a promissory note and a gift. It's to understand that there are tools out there that can help a person if they're in serious crisis and don't want to lose everything they've worked very, very hard for. Okay, so now we're just going to shift a little bit. We've talked a lot about nursing home care. Nursing home care, I started with because that has the 5-year look back component to it. And oftentimes that's where we see a lot of the crisis, because someone has not gotten past the 5-year look back. And we want to look to see if they have any exemptions that can be utilized, or if we can do the promissory note and loan strategy. But if I need care and I need a lot of it, and I still can be at home, paying privately for the care could also be tantamount to a crisis, right? We are having a crisis. Someone needs long-term care, and perhaps we don't have the money to cover it, or it's very expensive proposition, and we want to protect some of those assets. So let's talk about home care now. Okay. Some things stay the same, right? So we talked about $30,182 being what you're allowed to have for Medicaid nursing home care and for Medicaid home care, right? They talk about an equity cap on the home, but they also have an income limit. They say, hey, you can't have income of more than $1,697 per month. But when you're planning in crisis, you will learn that under the home care Medicaid rules, you can set up something called a charitable pooled income trust. And if your income is higher than that $1,697 per month, for example, you have Social Security and a pension and maybe some IRA distributions, it doesn't mean that you won't qualify for Medicaid. It just means you may have to just layer in an extra planning strategy, such as a pooled income trust. So when you hear certain sayings, hey, that person has too much income, they'll never get on Medicaid home care or Medicaid nursing home care, that is not necessarily the case. And that's why I raise it in the crisis planning webinar, because it's important to realize that not all hope is lost, and we can recapture that income. Okay. So here's what's interesting about the Medicaid home care rules versus the Medicaid nursing home care rules. Presently, they are not implementing any sort of look back period for home care. So if you remember when I talked about nursing home care, there was a 5-year look back, a 5-year wait. And that's why we were looking for exemptions, right? Or ways that we could transfer things within the 5 years. For home care, there is no 5-year wait. As a matter of fact, there's no look back period being implemented at all. So I can take my assets, I can move them out in August, and I can become eligible in September. That for me is a really huge component if I am in a crisis and I'm looking for my care at home to be covered, right? There's no look back period. Okay, now people say, but I heard it's 3 months, Kim. The 3 months that you're hearing about is just a typical documentation situation. We like to give the Department of Social Services or the Human Resource Administration 3 months so we could perhaps get retroactive coverage for those 3 months. It's not a look back period. So I don't want anybody to feel that if they've done no planning, they've got to wait for a certain amount of time to pass after transferring their assets. All right, so that's a really big tip. Now, we have another tip there, and it says file for Medicaid home care before the rules change. There's all kinds of talk swirling around a 2.5-year look back period for Medicaid home care. And what was recently talked about is that it was going to be implemented in March of 2024. We have since learned actually that this has been pushed off even to 2025. So I would just right now understand that there is no look back period being implemented for Medicaid home care. And if you feel that you or a loved one or someone that you know is in need of coverage for an aid at home, then this is something you want to be considering. Okay. So I wanted to end with implementing a plan in advance to avoid a crisis, because this webinar was not meant to say, it's okay, do nothing, and then we can find some sort of strategy to help you if you're ever in that crisis. What we want to be doing is avoiding the crisis if we can. Now, we know in this life, sometimes just crises happen, no matter how much we wanted to plan in advance or whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, something just happened and it couldn't be avoided. But what I'd like to stress today is that if you feel you're in the position now that you are able to plan in advance, you are able to get past that look back period. You don't want to be in a situation where you're hoping that you have the right exemptions to qualify, then you certainly want to try to plan in advance. So first I start with the 4 must-have legal documents. That's your durable power of attorney, that's your healthcare proxy, that's your living will, and it's your last will and testament and living trust. I want to start and highlight the durable power of attorney. I think that is one of the most important documents that will help you actually during a crisis. So in a hypothetical, let's say my mom was the one who needed the long-term care. She is in a situation where she had such a cognitive decline that she can't make her own decisions, and I have to help her. And I want to get her on Medicaid, and I want to help protect her assets for her so she doesn't have to worry about losing her house. If she did not have a comprehensive, durable power of attorney, I would not be in a legal situation to help my own mother. So the power of attorney is a document that nominates someone that you trust to make financial decisions for you and be your voice if you need them to. Healthcare proxy is also very important. You just want to make sure that you pick the person who is going to follow your healthcare decisions if you can't make your own, from the smallest decision all the way to end-of-life decisions. Which leads us to the living will, which is your healthcare declaration about what you would want as far as end-of-life decisions. Then you want to just make sure you have your last will and testament and your living trust in place. So that is your roadmap as to what you want to have happen way in the future when you're no longer here. From a substantive legal document standpoint, an asset protection plan, I wanted a sole slide on the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. This trust is a separate entity that a person sets up. And when they fund this trust, that is when the 5-year look-back period starts to commence, so that the asset that's held in the trust will eventually become protected in the event a person needs long-term care. So this Medicaid Asset Protection Trust allows you to protect your assets from Medicaid and the nursing home. You can keep the income from your assets that are held in the trust if you want. We'll talk about the pros and cons of that if it was ever needed to be discussed. It protects your home. It protects your assets and your heirs. It minimizes taxes on the sale of your residence, and it avoids probate. This Medicaid Asset Protection Trust is often the vehicle that you want to use to be protecting your assets in advance. So in summary, we want to start if we're ever in a crisis, and I'm going to work a little bit backwards. In summary, you want to implement your plan in advance. You want to perhaps do the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. You may want to put your home in your trust, maybe some of your assets in that trust. And after a period of 5 years, if you need nursing home care, anything in that trust is off the table, is not considered when being eligible for Medicaid, also known as the assets are protected. Now, when I do this trust and I transfer my assets to the trust for home care purposes, since there's no look back period, then they're immediately protected. So let's say I do this trust. I want to avoid the crisis. I was planning in advance, and now the crisis occurred because I didn't get past the 5-year look back. A catastrophic event happened, and I didn't get past the 5-year look back, or I never got a chance to do my planning. Then we go back to the first prong where we first look for exemptions. We spoke about from spouse to spouse. We spoke about from parent to live-in caregiver child. We spoke about from parent to a child who is disabled. And then we also spoke about a situation where there were no exemptions, but we had a way of protecting at least 40 to 50% of the assets. We called that the promissory note or loan and gift strategy. And lastly, we talked about home care. Since there is no look back period for home care, if someone is in need of an aid covered at home, then Medicaid home care may be a valuable option for that individual. Okay, so let's open it up to some questions. We have a few minutes, and I'm happy to do so.
All right, Kim, we do have a few questions in the Q&A box. I'll start with the first one. What are the rules regarding a secondary investment property being rented out with tenants?
Okay, so I'm going to take this question as it relates to the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. So if I'm doing a Medicaid Asset Protection Trust, I have many clients that take their investment properties and they put it in the trust. And if they get past the look back period, that investment property is protected as well. So when you are meeting with your estate planning attorney, certainly raise the issue of investment properties because that's very important. Okay.
Okay. Our next question is a two-parter. Does the transfer to a special needs trust qualify as exempt if there is a beneficiary of the special needs trust once the disabled child deceases? Part two, if there is already an irrevocable funeral trust fund established and the person adds additional funds within the 5-year look back, will there be a penalty? And I'm sorry, there is a third part. Is there any reason why a U.S. bond should not be purchased with funds in an irrevocable trust?
Okay, all good questions. So does the transfer to a special needs trust qualify as exempt if there is a beneficiary of the special needs trust once the disabled child passes away? So I think what the question is when does the exemption when does the exemption have to exist? And it exists upon the funding. So if the disabled beneficiary is alive when you make the transfer, then it's considered an exempt transfer. Because when you made the transfer, it qualified under the exemption. So way in the future, if something were to have happened to the beneficiary, it still would be considered exempt because when it happened, you were following the correct procedure and rules. With that said, you have to understand this is a very general webinar. So with that said, there's more to this. Because if it was a first-party special needs trust, for example, there might be a payback to the government if there was anything in there, right? So this question on its face is actually very complicated. And if you're in a situation like that, you should make sure you meet with us because we can explain, well, maybe the transfer in was exempt. We have to look under the hood to make sure that there's not cascading ramifications after. All right, this is really important. This is very general what we're talking about today. All right. Okay. If there is an already an irrevocable funeral trust established and the person adds additional funds. Yeah, prepaying a funeral at any time, even after the Medicaid coverage date, is still considered exempt. So if it's going into that irrevocable funeral policy, I would take the position that it's a non-issue. Of course, always have it reviewed before you do that. Is there any issue why a U.S. bond should not be purchased with funds in an irrevocable trust? It depends on what kind of irrevocable trust you're talking about, but if you're referring to the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust, I don't see a reason why you couldn't use the liquid in the trust to purchase those bonds. Okay. What are the Medicaid rules regarding assisted living and I'm sorry. I took your spotlight, Ashley.
You read it better than me, Kim.
I'm sorry. All right. Well, I just got
I'll get
excited.
the next one.
What are the Medicaid rules regarding assisted living or independent care? Excellent, excellent question. So, because that could be part of a crisis. Maybe someone is not home care ready and they're not at a nursing home level, but they could maybe go into that intermediate step of assisted living. So here where we live, assisted livings are primarily private pay, not covered by Medicaid. However, there is a handful of assisted livings that do have what's called out beds and assisted living program that do allow for community Medicaid coverage. And that's huge, right? Because if you recall what I said, the community Medicaid versus the nursing home Medicaid actually doesn't have that 5-year look back. So if you have someone in that situation, you really want to be making sure you speak with us about what's called out beds in an assisted living facility. All right. Did I miss any? We're a little bit over on time.
There's a few more.
I'm gonna go.
We have
I'm
time.
gonna jump to the last one because the second to last one is extensive, and I'm happy to explain it again. But if someone needed to leave, I'm gonna do the shorter one first, and then go back to that just for a couple minutes. We'll end by 1:35. So, is there a look back period for gifts made from parents to children from for Medicare purposes? Well, Medicare, unlike Medicaid, is the payer of short-term, and that is just essentially insurance and has nothing to do with long-term care coverage. And we have no issues with gifts for Medicare. I think you may be referring to Medicaid, though. So yes, if I just simply gift assets to my children and they are not considered disabled, they're not under any of the exemptions, then those gifts are considered transfers under the Medicaid rules. And many of my clients say, hey, wait a minute though, I thought the IRS said I can give $17,000 a year to anybody I want and not have to file a gift tax return. Yes, but that's an IRS rule. It's not a Medicaid rule. So you have to be cognizant if you think that someone might need long-term care in a facility within 5 years, you really have to be cognizant about gifting to family members. Doesn't mean you can't, but you have to understand the rules around them. All right, last but not least, can you explain the gift and loan again? Sure, I'm going to do an example. I have $400,000 of assets, but Medicaid says I can't have that much money, right? But if I transfer the assets out of my name and it's not to someone who's exempt, well, I'm in the 5-year look back. And what Medicaid says is, here on Long Island, I'm going to use Long Island, I could use New York City, but here on Long Island, what Medicaid says is, for every $14,136 in assets that I transfer, that's 1 month of penalty in a nursing home, right? So if I transfer $200,000 and they divide it by that number, that's several months that I'm not eligible. So how am I going to pay for that? And so I take the other half, I loan it, and that loan is crunched over the penalty period that the gift of the $200,000 costs. I pay that loan back over that penalty, and when that loan is exhausted, my gift is saved, and now I'm Medicaid eligible. What's interesting is one of the biggest things you need to make this plan work is a power of attorney. a comprehensive power of attorney. So it all circles back to planning in advance and making sure I have the right to do certain things and to help my loved ones if they need it. All right, I hope I answered everybody's questions.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I'm going to let Ashley finish up. I just want to say one more thing. We want to thank you for attending our seminars or our webinars, and we are so appreciative that we're pleased to offer you $100 off our planning meeting. They're typically $600, so $100 credit would be afforded to you. And we just ask that, you know what, you schedule the meeting prior to September 30th. That way we can understand that this was from the crisis planning seminar that we did. And we just want to reiterate how grateful we are that you joined us today. And I hope this was informative and helpful to you.
Thanks, Kim. As you mentioned, I'll go ahead and wrap us up. So what makes Russo Law Group different? Our clients tell us that it's our dedication, accessibility, scope of legal services, and years of experience that gives them the peace of mind and confidence when working with us. We will not learn at your expense. Long Island News called us the leading elder law firm on Long Island. We've helped over 17,000 families and have 11 attorneys who stand ready, willing, and able to step right in and help. We have 3 convenient office locations. We do offer home visits and virtual appointments as well. We have a peace of mind program that provides you with the security of knowing that your attorney is accessible whenever you have questions or potential problems or opportunities related to your estate plan. And it helps ensure that your comprehensive plan is well maintained. Finally, for upcoming events, we invite you to join Kim and Tom Morosco for their seminar on estate planning, protect yourself and your family at the Mona Lisa restaurant in Point Lookouts. It's on September the 21st from 12 to 2:30 p.m. This is an in-person event that will include a complimentary lunch while the attorneys discuss the essential estate planning documents, long-term care and estate tax planning, and asset protection for your family. So you can visit our website to register or click the link provided in the chat, which if you give me just a moment, I will send to everyone. Okay, there we go. If anyone has questions, please call our office. We are available to speak with you. Here are a list of services that we provide and all the ways that we can help you and your family. We have a robust website at bjrussolaw.com, information, forms, resources, so please take advantage of it. We appreciate all of you for joining us. Please leave us your feedback in the webinar survey that will appear on your screen. And in case you missed any portion of today's webinar or you want to go back and review, we will email you a link to the recording. Okay, that wraps this up, Kim.
Awesome.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.